For this sock blank, I want to try to make it into a sock tube and then knit toes, heel, and cuff. That way I can keep the patterning that's on the sock blank. It's an extra long sock blank, almost 6 feet long. So I know that I could probably get 2 pairs of socks out of this. So I've folded it in half, and then I folded it in half again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it in half and cut those halves in half. So basically I'm cutting the sock blank into quarters. From there, I'm going to connect the edges and seam it up. So I'm going to cut it and then I will show you the seaming. So I have half my sock blank here. I think that will be enough to make 2 socks out of it. I've folded it in half, and right here where the center is, I'm going to pick up 2 lines of stitches with 1 line in between, and I'll show you what that looks like. That is going to give me a space to cut and unravel and then have 2 ends that are already held on waste yarn. Okay, so I have marked the center of my sock blank and picked up the stitches right in the center. And if you can see, there is 1 line in between the 2 rows where I picked up. And that is where I'm going to take my scissors and snip. Now I can just unravel this center line and have 2 separate sock blanks to make tubes out of. If you've done an afterthought heel, this is the same basic concept. You pick up the stitches on both sides and cut the row in the center. Except that for this, you will actually be separating the 2 sides of the blank. So you can see I've started to sew up the tube. I'm just doing a mattress stitch and connecting the 2 sides. I'm picking up the bar in between the first 2 stitches on one side and then going to the other side and doing the same thing. I'll just keep doing that all the way up the blank until I have 1 long tube. And you see that it leaves a seam on the inside. So what I plan to do is have this seam be on the inside of my ankle and then the inside of the inner spot on my foot. And that way it doesn't create a big bump on the bottom of my foot or along the top of the sock, and hopefully it won't be so large that I feel it or mind it. One thing I'll have to be careful of though, once this is a full tube and I want to cut in a heel, I don't want to cut through the spot where I've seamed it. So I will have to kind of measure out to make sure I have enough to cut a heel in without cutting through that. But we'll get to that when we're there. Okay, so I've sewn up this tube. Here's the seam right here. And picked up 1 end, and this is going to be the ribbing end. So I just put picked up the stitches where I had waste yarn and put them on my circular needles. Now I'm going to make this the ribbing end because this needs to be the left foot. I want this pattern to show on the front, which means I want the seam on the inside of my foot. So if the seam's going on the inside, I want this pattern on the front of the foot, then this will need to be the ribbing because the heel will need to be back here. So you kind of have to keep an idea of how you want your pattern to show up when you are creating your sock. Let me show you. This is the other one that I have already finished. So here's the seam on the inside. This will be the right foot. and then the pattern on the outside that will show up the leg. And it feels great. I've put it on, it doesn't bother me at all as far as having the seam on the inside, and it fits well. So what I did is I just picked up the stitches along one end. Once I seamed up the tube, I picked up the stitches and I did a 1x1 rib. And then both for the toe and the heel, I picked up the stitches. And when you do this now, you'll have to make sure that you line up your stitches so that you have your toe angled the way you want it for this sock. So again, like with this one, if I want this to be the front, I want the seam to be on the inside, the left inside of my foot, then the toe is going to be here. I need to make sure that I have 32 stitches on the front and 32 stitches on the back, and that it's lined up evenly. So what I did is I picked up for the toe and the heel the 64 stitches, and I knit one full round, and then I just did the standard decrease for both the heel and the toe. So this is basically another toe right here. This is the heel. So I knit a full round, and then I decreased, let's see, slip, slip, knit, knit to the last 2 stitches, then knit 2 together. Then on the next needle on the other side, same thing, slip, slip, knit, knit to the end, and then knit 2 together. Then I knit a whole round, and I continued those 2 rounds until I had 14 stitches on my needles. And then I did a Kitchener stitch and finished it off. And I did the exact same thing for the heel. And that's your sock. So I'm going to continue working on this one, and I'll show you when I am done. All right, so here I've got my heel my cuff and my toe. And the seam right here is along this side. So this is going to be the inside of the sock. The pattern will be on the outside. So I want the heel, if this is the left foot, if you imagine this being my foot, I want the heel on this side, okay? I know that for my size foot, I wear about a size 7.5, that I need to measure back 7 inches, a little over 7 inches from the toe. So I have this, and we're all marked on here. This one's called the sock ruler, and I've got everybody's size marked on here, so I know if I go 7 inches from the toe or a little more, so right about here, I can put in my needles, I can pick up stitches and trim. So I'm going to use my circular needles and pick up 32 stitches on each needle with 1 row in between, and then I'll trim that row. Now, what I was saying earlier was that I'm going to want to watch for this seam right here, because you can feel it when you're doing this. This is where I seamed up the sock blank. So I don't want to cut through that, or else I've cut my seam. So I am basically going to pick up 1 stitch to the side of it. So if here's the seam, then I will pick up 1 stitch over and go 32 stitches, and then another 32 on the other needle. So let me do that, and then I'll snip it and show you. Okay, so here you see a little over 7 inches. I've picked up 2 rows with 1 row in between, and that is the row that I will snip in the center and take out the yarn so that I have a piece on either end to weave in later. And I started picking up my stitches 1 row over from the seam where I seamed it together. And the reason why I did that is because I want the heel to still match up with the toe. And if I go too far over, then my heel is way off from my toe. So because my toe was lined up with the seam, basically the seam of, or the edge of the toe goes along where the seam is, then the heel needed to be as close to lined up with that as possible. All right, so let's grab some scissors and snip. go. Now I can start unraveling from the center. Okay. So now I have the heel area open. I have it on my needles. I'm just going to start knitting, and I'll do it the same way as I did the toe. I'm going to knit one round and then slip, slip, knit, 2 stitches together, knit to the last 2 stitches, then knit those 2 together, slip, slip, knit, knit to the last 2 and knit those 2 together. Then I'll knit a row and repeat the decreased row until I have 14 stitches, and that's when I'll do my Kitchener stitch, and that will be my heel. I can use these 2 strands of yarn to help close up any little holes I have in the edges, and then weave in all the ends and I'll be done. Voila! I'll show you guys as soon as I'm finished.